Well, Boris Johnson and his team have been talking a big game about the EU, and I have my reservations about whether what we're going to go through today is essentially true, because I think potentially this is a no deal is what Johnson and the Conservatives are really pushing for. We've talked before on this channel about disaster capitalism, and a no deal Brexit is the it's really the best form of disaster capitalism they can possibly hope for. Destroy Britain, and then just pick up all the parts of its industry and businesses for an absolute pittance. And that's what disaster capitalism does. You buy it, you destroy the country, buy it all up, and then sell it off again for something more. But that's, we were warning against this for years, even before the referendum, about what the Tories were intended to do and what this is their modus operandi. It's what Margaret Thatcher did. It's what Tories of the past have done. But there you go, the party of business people. So Boris Johnson team is talking tough on the EU deal, but it's all for show. Leave means leave. Strip away the thoughtful, learned tone of the speech made by David Frost, Downing Street's Brexit negotiator in Brussels on Monday, and that was the gist of it. Ahead of negotiations formally opening next month, he insisted, albeit in the most diplomatic terms, that Boris Johnson wasn't bluffing. Then, last autumn, the Prime Minister may have had to threaten to walk away without a deal, only to cave in eventually, but this time he meant it. Whatever the price of refusing to stick to EU rules and regulations or accept the EU's court involvement in enforcing them, Johnson would pay it. The itch to be free was, from Frost, explained by not a single negotiating position which might move under pressure. It is the point of the whole project. It's scary stuff for anyone whose livelihood is casually tossed up in the air as a result. Yet, reading between the lines of a speech was that all-important principle of freedom, not the nitty-gritty of what might be done with it, but the space in which Downing Street seems to imagine a deal might nevertheless be done is taking shape. The only problem is that hitting it looks like the equivalent of landing a jumbo jet in a back garden in a gale. Boris Johnson's only real red line is that Britain must not emerge looking like a rule taker. He knows that for many long-standing Tory voters, the urge to leave stems from the libertarian iteration with what they see as the ultimate in big nanny states. Railing against Brussels comes from the same powerful but irrational irrational stable as resistance to smoking bans, speed cameras, and Greta Thunberg. The itch to be free of rules and regulations doesn't survive contact with reality. Nick Clegg's former director of policy, Polly Mackenzie, once described farcical scenes inside David Cameron's government as they struggled to find some symbolic red tape to scrap, only to realise regulation mostly exists for extremely good reasons. But unless it is scratched, Brexit won't feel real to those voters. So, at all costs, Britain cannot look like a rule taker, but that's not necessarily the same as being one. There is a tiny opening for compromise. If Britain can noisily establish its right to diverge from EU rules and regulation, then it could choose in theory to not use that right much in practice, hammering out sector-specific agreements beneath the cover of a headline deal where the government would opt for something suspiciously like the status quo. For example, manufacturing industries keen to keep selling inside the EU would need to stick to EU safety and regulatory standards, even if it's some flexibility in the process of developing new products. Frost talks soothingly about Britain seizing a competitive advantage in regulating new sectors, where the EU couldn't keep up with fast-moving scientific developments. Rather than ripping up existing regulation, could Downing Street be angling for not so much as an Australia or Canada, or a hard or soft Brexit, but for what might be called a cat's Brexit. Anyone who's ever opened a door for a cat is a cat that is clearly asking to go out, only for that cat to stay firmly put, knows how this one works. Cats don't want to go out in the rain, get soaked through so much as they want to opt to go out, as they want to go out freely and sovereignly at any point without the indignation of squeezing through a cat flap. From a cat's perspective too, doors are an insufferable brake on their global ambitions. But once the door is open, it is the cat's business whether it chooses to stay in the warm or not. While humans tolerate this behaviour from cats because we love them, however, it is less clear that the EU has that patience. Frost speech upped the ante, notably by referring to resurgent nationalist feelings across Europe, a hint that blocking British demands for independence might have a knock-on effect that even if nobody else seeks to leave, this might not be the last populist uprising the EU faces. But if what the Prime Minister really wants is freedom to diverge in return for understanding that neither this nor future governments will exploit that freedom excessively, then that requires a huge leap of faith from European perspective in a departing ally that has done little to earn it of late. If what Johnson really wants is for Brussels to trust him, then he will have to talk more than soothing talk. And that's the premise to, like I say, looking at how negotiations are going. Until they actually start, we don't know how they'll go. The EU have already said, yeah, what you're asking for is just ridiculous and unworkable. Then the UK government turned around and said the exact same thing. What you're asking for is completely ridiculous and unworkable. So here's the thing: the EU is a massive market. It is far stronger than our economy. It has infinitely more leverage than we do. We will be hurt massively from not being able to have access to its markets. Even if you do trade deals with America, Australia, and all these other deals that we want to do, they will not replace the loss of trade and GDP that we will suffer from not being in the EU any longer. Once again, this is economics playing out exactly as we said it would. Once again, we were called Project Fear, and once again, it's looking like Project Fear is becoming Project Reality. So, once again, the Brexit dream is, as it said there, when it meets reality, it just goes down in flame. And, I've said this quite a lot this week, but we've said it many times on this channel. The Conservatives, especially David Cameron, come from, many Conservatives, not just David Cameron, Boris Johnson himself, come from this libertarian idea that nothing should be regulated. There should be no regulations whatsoever. Businesses should be allowed to do business regardless and just get on with it. But regulations come from being a source of good, and they are in place for a reason. You can't just go cutting them willy-nilly. It is well worth looking up that Polly Mackenzie quote of them trying to scramble to try and cut up red tape for Cameron's promise that he would, quote, cut government red tape. So they were trying to scramble for the smallest amount of regulations they could try and find to try and cut it, but they were coming up with regulations and they were like, whoa, you can't cut that regulation because it is really important to this industry, or it's really important to ensure safety to workers and consumers. So, yeah, and it's more worrying the fact that we now have a massive Conservative majority that, if it wanted to, could just start cutting regulations left, right and centre. And that would leave, once again, this country in a massive, massive problem. This idea of a cat's Brexit, of Boris Johnson saying that we'll have, quote, freedom, but we won't actually diverge, is, I think it's plausible that's what he might seem to be going for. But at the end of the day, yeah, if you want access to the EU's markets, you have to follow their rules. Canada does this, Japan does this, Mexico does this. All these countries that have trade deals have to follow the EU's rules if it wants to sell goods in the European Union. And we ain't no different. If it was the same deal for Canada and all these others, why on earth should we be treated any different? And we've gone over this before on this channel of how important these rules are. But there you go. So, and this is just the start. And I've said before, the summer is where everything's gonna kick off. At the moment, Boris Johnson's honeymoon period has officially ended because of the floods and so forth. Yeah, the summer, the Tory party is going to... Because on one hand, you've got ultra-libertarians who are like, there must be no regulations, whatsoever. And then you've got the other side who actually recognise that regulations are important. And the two sides just won't mesh. So there's going to be a massive feud in the summer from the Tory party. Yeah. All I can say is I'm just going to sit back and just watch the chaos unfold. Because the arguments that we were having before the withdrawal agreement, those past 3 years, still haven't really been settled. Just because you've passed the withdrawal agreement, because you had weight of numbers on your side this time, doesn't mean those arguments have been settled. The argument was to, convince the plebs, as Boris Johnson would put it, that Brexit's been done. Hasn't at all. And I can definitely see the withdrawal agreement having to be extended past this year. There just isn't enough time to be able to do it.